Hi, everybody. It's Naomi Hattaway, the founder and owner of the I Am a Triangle community as it lives on the internet and as we get together in real life in over 70 cities across the globe. We are coming to you with another really fun interview where we give you an opportunity to learn more about our fabulous advisory board. So today we have Michael Pollock with us, and we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into his story, his background, and the work that he does in the world, which is quite amazing, and I think you'll really enjoy this interview. So Michael, thank you so much for not only agreeing to be on the advisory board, but also taking some time for this interview.
My pleasure. Thank you, Naomi.
So I will just turn it over to you right away. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself, your background, your story?
Sure. Since I guess we're talking to a global nomad, a global expat community, I was highly mobile as a kid, 3 states in the U.S. and in East Africa. And then as I went to college, my parents moved again. And then during that time, the pre-college and college years, I spent time working overseas a bit, South Africa for a couple of months in the 80s, and then England, and then during college, then back to Kenya to do some student teaching and things. So I love that aspect, the cultures, the people, the languages, the travel, feeling at home in airports, and then. And then came this, a settled period where we were looking to, my wife and I were looking to go overseas and looked at a lot of options, and just long story, wound up in Baltimore, Maryland for 12 years. And so that was a surprise, but also a very, between Baltimore and DC, a very international community moving through. And so a lot of contacts there with international folks. And then that kind of led my work in education, led me to take a position in East Asia. I was elementary principal in Tianjin, China for 5 years, and then switched over my work to work with the 6 schools in our system for LDI and doing student development and outreach, and getting to do cool things like hiking into the Yunnan Mountains and stuff like that. So,
and tell us what is LDI? What does LDI stand for?
Leadership Development International. The schools are International Schools of China, ISC, and so they're serving the expat community all throughout China. We said we were kind of a system working together, but it'd be like if you were in the States having a school in Chicago and one in Dallas and one in New York City, and saying, oh yeah, we're all part of the same system.
Right. Well, and I've been fascinated to learn about LDI, and it's such a cool thing.
Yeah, great, a great work and terrific people, and just a plug. Always looking for good teachers who are looking for international opportunities. So that's really, I guess out of that my background, my parents were in missions. My mom taught nurses, my dad taught Bible students, but also worked with a lot of expat families. And then, he moved into that work with interaction, serving the globally mobile community everywhere. And so I think it was really from that background that I then, as we were in China, looking at where our students were headed, to, whatever that was, 26 different countries, back to passport countries, and to international situations with education, that there was a lot of, and I should always say this, some of the students did really well, straight out of the gate. They got where they were going, they plugged in and made their transition. But there were just too many who were struggling, too many who, whether it was academics were fine, social life crashed. Social life was fine, and academics were crashed. Crises in faith, crises in health. And so, and when parents are on the other side of the world, and kids who, even with maybe their family connections, are saying, well, these are people I'm supposed to know that I don't know. How do I go to them and ask for help? How do I, where do I go to understand the culture, to understand the expectations, to make up for some of the deficits I might have with a driver's license, or figuring out my first year's taxes. So yeah, so
that's all big.
So
I mean, we have a 22-year-old, and he was in Singapore and Delhi for his high school years, and so we brought him back for his first year of college. And you're right, those deficits and what he should know, what he's supposed to know, the catch-up time with all of his peers, it's all some big stuff that I'm glad that you're shedding the light on, because it's pretty important.
Yeah, we found with our kids the same, and I think one of the changes that a lot of the TCK caregivers have noticed in the past few years is there's sometimes a false sense of, well, I'll understand it and I'll know how it works, because of global culture, because there's a lot of things they do know and understand. They're not areas of catch up, but one quick area that we noticed was, when you get into local culture, you may know some things about global trends and things that are going on, so you're not quite as lost and out there. You blend in better.
Yep. But
you don't know the local sports teams necessarily, or who's popular with this or that, or what the people around you are into. And so there's a lot of learning. So that's we saw that need, and looked for other folks who were doing something similar, and found some, but really discovered this or just identified a niche where not enough was happening.
Yes.
So that's how we got back into the U.S. and how we wound up in Michigan.
So the name of the work of your business, of your offering that you put out into the world, is called Daraja. Did that start in Baltimore, or did that start once you ended up in Michigan? That was after that was post Maryland, right?
Right. Yeah, it was really the post China piece. Okay. In 2012, we headed back to the U.S. We had our middle son was graduating from high school, and so we had two in the States, and then our youngest was adopted in China and still hadn't spent a consecutive amount of time, and so there were some legal things there that we wanted to make sure we covered, and so we made the jump, and but said, yeah, we're gonna start an initiative, an organization that is really focused on both meeting the need, but recognizing, that also there's an advocacy piece with organizations, with families, and even university, college situations. So Daraja is a Swahili word that means bridge or stepping stones, and because it really is crossing that divide. People talk about re-entry for expats coming back to their passport country. For a lot of TCKs, it's entry. It's the time they're crossing back into an unknown country and culture. But the weird part is they're supposed to know it. Right. And we get this lie that we tell ourselves that, I really should know. I'll catch on in a minute.
I'll figure it out.
It'll be easy. And then you have kids from who've grown up in Brazil, showing up in winter in sandals in Minnesota, and et cetera. It doesn't necessarily work out so well.
Yeah. And so what is your long-term vision for Daraja? I mean, I don't see that the globally mobile is slowing down at all. I think that even if anything, more and more people, from what I'm seeing, are choosing to move away from their passport country. So it's not ending anytime soon. And for each family, the learning curve is always there. So what's your long-term vision? How do you see this continuing on in the years to come?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think really we spent the first couple of years looking at what is the need and getting to know different communities where that movement's taking place. I guess we'll talk about this later too, but even some of the things that came into the third edition of the TCK book were from those observations and looking at how things have changed, what continues to move. Yeah, the global population is more mobile than it's ever been. And so, and the mixing of people and culture is more complex, I think, than any other time in history. And so, so the question, the core values are, how do we care for, encourage, and equip the particularly young adult cross-culturals? So one thing that it's really important to, that I always say is that you have to balance the two sides. There's a challenge side, on the one hand, and then there's this gift and benefit side on the other. And if you highlight or overemphasize either one, you're going to come out of balance and miss something important. And I always want to be careful too, not to put too much weight on the shoulders of this, a young generation. Kind of these millennials, and then the group coming behind the millennials that. But there's so much change, and there is so much cultural and global mixing that it's creating both new opportunities and new challenges. Across every realm of human enterprise, right? And so it's not that they hold the key to that future. That's too heavy a pressure, I think. But it's that this group holds some dynamic skills and some understandings. Often, and this gets challenged from time to time, because quality of experience matters. Just growing up between cultures doesn't make you empathetic to different cultures. I understand that. But these exposures and this life and these understandings, I think, puts it really poises them. It puts them in a place where they can be very effective in global society, in local society.
Yeah. And it's almost like it creates more of a fertile ground for possibilities when they've had that experience. Can you, just because we hear this all of the time, a lot of people do not know what TCK is, what it stands for. Can you give it just a real short definition of that? I know It's hard to believe because we use it all the time, and so people say it and they're like, wait, what is that?
No, that's fair enough. One should never throw around acronyms lightly. It's so third culture kids are children who have spent a significant amount of their developmental years, and that is still an argument whether it ends at 18 or continues a little bit. And I would say it continues a little bit, but traditional TCKs that up through birth through 18, and they've gone into these other cultures with their parents. Anyway, the traditional TCK, that's kind of the how it's come about, not just being sent somewhere, but you move as a family unit into a new culture because of parental work or study. Now, the rest of the definition is not, is more of a description of what happens to a person. But the bottom line of that is that often it means that there's not a full sense of ownership in any particular culture, but a sense of belonging in relationships to other people of similar experience, and then to those who share big pieces of those cultures.
Yeah.
But, so that's a basic. Okay.
So it's good that we talked about that, because I think this was the first edition of Third Culture Kids, The Experience of Growing Up Among Worlds, and it was one of the books that my mother, who is a missionary in Kenya, bought for me when we were preparing to move abroad. So it's highlighted and underlined and dog-eared and falling apart. But you are preparing to release the third edition of this book that was written by your father with Ruth Van Raken, who are both two pillars in this world of global mobility. So talk to us a little bit about the third edition, what you've learned in working with Ruth on this. Share with us a little bit about that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, what you just asked, what I learned working with Ruth on this project, my goodness, that would take me a long time. Ruth is an amazing person. And the fun part actually too, I mean, I wish we had recorded some of these, because we got into quite heated discussions about friendly but heated about, well, who's included and who's not and why. And really, so we made some decisions because it is a global conversation about, well, how does this term fit and is it appropriate? And of course, Ruth in the second edition, which I do have here somewhere. So this was edition number 2, and she introduced the idea of cross-cultural kids. So kind of beyond. So
a bigger, yeah.
Kids with parents from different nationalities, cultures. What happens internally with subcultures? There's some overlap. Children of international, for international adoptions,
yeah.
And so lots of iterations of that cross culture. Well, I would say we did a lot of discussing about how mobility and change impacts identity formation. We pulled in a lot of new research that some of it is quite sobering. I don't know,
sure.
that the Danish study with I think 1.5 million Danes, basically saying moving is bad for people,
mm-hmm.
and
yet we still do it.
Well, and we must, right? So the conclusion that I came to, and I think Ruth shares, is that it's really moving that's unaddressed. It's exposing someone to all those stressors and those changes, the loss, the grief, all the upset, social connections, and not addressing them. And so that seems to be the key. So the question in the book then was, well, how do we address some of those things from a family side, from an organizational side, put some big pieces in there as well with some new thoughts and some new models. And so I think it's a really, I'm excited about it coming out. And it comes out in September. It's Nicholas Brealey. The parent group that bought it was Hachette, the French company. And so not only we're excited about it coming out, but it looks like it may go through, a set of translations.
Good.
Love to see it in Mandarin, and of course there was a Korean version for a while that I think is out of print. So love to see that picked up. But across the globe, the African diaspora, the Koreans and the Chinese, Europeans are always traveling. It's I think a really helpful resource, and I hope it gets translated.
Yeah. That would be really cool. That'd be really great. So the link is a little bit hard to just spit out as a good link. So we'll make sure that along with this video and anywhere that it's shared, that we'll make sure that everyone has the link for that. In the meantime, if you have not read the first book or the second edition, they're just fabulous set of resources. So I'd highly encourage you to do that. And you said earlier, Michael, that the book is available for pre-order now. So we could get our orders in and then make sure that it's delivered the day it's released.
Right. Yeah, I've seen it on Amazon. I've seen it on Barnes and Nobles.
Perfect.
as a pre-order option. So
great. Well, I'm very much looking forward to it as well. So that'll be really, really amazing to be able to read that. What is your definition of the word or your idea around the concept of community? Another one that's not really easy to just answer in a few sentences.
Right. Well, and it's kind of, it's mocked out there, in lots of places because it's been such a buzzword. But I think when I think of community, that is first the co. Co means with.
Yep.
And so there's a presentness that's essential in being with a group of people. So truly learn to be with each other. And so I think that then there's responsibility in that we become responsible for one another, which, unless you come from a society that values that group, interaction, if you come from a culture that's much more individualistic, that's a little bit hard.
Right.
I'm really responsible for the people around me. But I think good community means that it is. We are responsible, we share, share responsibilities, share stories. We share our stuff, as people have need, we share, we share on that emotional level. There's that deep need to know and to be known. And again, I think that's one of the challenges among third culture kids and highly mobile people. It's why, and just as a side note, it's why I don't always like the term global nomad. So I talk with my kids about this a lot, all of them. So 25, 23, and 14, my 14-year-old going on 30. And
a girl?
Yes. And, we talk about that, the idea, global nomads. It kind of came to the conclusion that the reason that we balk at the term nomad is that nomads often pick up and take their family, culture, stuff, responsibilities and all that, with them. I've lived with a Maasai in East Africa, spent time with a couple other mobile populations. And anyway, so that's what's, often we don't get to in the expat community. We're often leaving those ties and connections behind, even our jobs, responsibilities, titles, our identity.
I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah. And so, so there's another, anyway, my son says, he likes to think of his life as a houseboat. He doesn't quite get to take the whole tribe together, but it's important to take some of those things, pieces. And so, I think in that, talk about the emotions, like stories are a great place for that to begin, because when we start to really hear each other, then we can commit. But in that intimacy doesn't happen without trust.
Right.
And so, so community is a space where I think where trust can be built, and then those different things can be shared.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting because we kind of all joke about it inside of the Triangle community that we have this great ability and opportunity to revamp ourselves every time we move. We can show up into a new location however we want to because they don't know what we've lived in the past. But I think there's some danger to that because we start to have kind of that nomadic attitude of picking up and redepositing yourself as a new person. And that's part of what I find that's helpful in a community also, is to be able to start to really get to know people and have that be something that translates no matter where you're living and how many times you move. So let's jump into talking about the Triangle community for a little bit. What is an example of a situation or something you've witnessed with the Triangle community that's been of impact or that you've been interested to watch happen?
Yeah. We were talking about this a little earlier, and I think one of the first things that struck me was just the numbers explosion. That original blog post that you shared hit this global nerve in a way that other things haven't. And there are still I'm referring people all the time. I think there's been a waiting for kind of a catalyzing place. TC Kid, I think was a place for that for a time. It was a kind of a gathering spot. But I think it's in part, the responsiveness of the Triangle community that has kind of set it apart, and that things are constantly happening there. So one of the things that first struck me about the community was how many of my friends from all over the globe that that I'm in touch with from time to time because our paths cross. We're suddenly we're there, which makes it fun. That's my idea of a really good time is having a week on an island somewhere where all the people that you've met along the way, you're like, hey, we should invite them, and everyone's glad can come.
The only bad thing is, though, people need to make sure that they're not sharing what's supposed to be a secret in the Triangle community, because it's very likely that someone will know about your next posting before your parents do.
Right. If everybody you've ever met is on that island together, yes, they're going to know people are going to know each other and have other networks.
Right.
You're going to get through those 7 layers of connectedness quickly.
Yeah, really fast.
But I think even watching it operate, when someone has a specific need, like I need a good moving company for the UAE,
Yeah.
boom boom boom, there are people there set up. And then but the same with more general needs. I'm saying goodbye to my my kids are going to school overseas. This is the first time I'm going through this. We're just we're torn up over this. Who else has gone through this? And there are like 1,000 people who've
Right.
gone through the same thing and willing to share their stories or their some help corners or whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are some outstanding outstanding moments with the Triangle community that catch my attention.
Yeah. Well, and it's been interesting also because we've watched people come into the community, and within literally seconds, they feel that trust, and they're sharing things that they haven't ever shared with their therapists or their spouses or their partners. And it's been humbling to watch a group of people, because they feel that belonging, feel the trust also right away, to share some pretty heavy stuff. But it's also been really cool to see some of the people that I've followed for a long time and who I've looked to for advice or for wisdom, jumping in to offer their support and their wisdom. We've got people that have been living this lifestyle for 40 and 50 years, and they're still showing up every day to say, it's okay, we've got you, we hear you. And that's been really cool too.
Yeah. No, it's great, and I'm so interested to see where it goes next, and obviously wanted to be a part of that and see it growing up. So I seem sort of addicted to startups, so it's a good place to be, but a great community.
Well, and so that goes into the next question. I wanted to ask why you were okay, or why you said yes to serve on the advisory board. And one of the reasons I asked you was because of your innate connection to the third culture kid world, your own experiences, having had your dad write the book, but also kind of, I felt like you were on the cusp of redefining what's next, and not just being okay with letting status quo continue, but looking ahead as a visionary and saying, what is it that we can do to help solve these problems for the future? And I don't know if I ever relayed that to you, but I really felt like you were one of the few that is willing to say, this has been okay, but it's not okay for those in the future. And what can we do about it? So tell me, share with us a little bit about your interest in serving on the advisory board. I know you've got you've got your fingers in a lot of projects. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a pleasure. I think I'm really, there'll be time as we begin to really understand the role. My first desire was really to, I was honored to be invited to the table, and to know that there are a lot of really excellent, experienced, folks who are around this conversation, and I feel actually that that it's one of the things that's missing in our global tribe, in a sense, because we are mobile, and because it can be difficult to meet up. I served on the board of Families in Global Transition for 2 years, and that's a great place, and I know that you've jumped in there now as well. And so it's a great place to to mix and cross those conversations. I think the Triangle community has a little bit of a different angle, if you will, on meeting needs and meeting people where they are, and for me it's a giving and learning process as well. I know that that there's cross-pollination in the process, but I do see it's like I'm kind of walking through, and actually my next meeting is with folks from SPAN from
Doug, Oda, and Ellen. Yeah.
Yeah, safe passage across networks. And that idea is we got to do this better in schools. So I was at the FIGT conference where Doug Boda first brought that to folks, saying, let's get this thing going. I wasn't able to be at FIGT this last year where it started, but I stood at that point and said, we're talking about international elementary and middle and high schools. Why aren't we talking about the university level? And again, and that's particularly my niche in the past few years has been that transition into university. But I see that when globally mobile parents and communities and kids start saying, we're looking for this in our education. We're looking for people who get it, who know both some of the things that we bring into the situation and we can build on. Right. Such as 4 years of Russian or Mandarin, or 8 years, or total fluency. Anywhere from that to then, but the needs. Well, how do I move forward in a career? How do I, how do I put these experiences to work for me? And how do I then make up maybe the deficit side, the things that I don't know about the culture, that I don't know about the workforce here, about my options, about who can stand in that place to to help. How do I find a mentor?
Right.
So I think when the community looks at that, the Triangle community looks at some of those needs as a unified group and begins to maybe push on some of those places. That's when change happens. Gladwell's tipping point. You gotta, it's in part it's the numbers. Yeah. And so when people get together and start sharing those stories and say, oh, that's not just me, that's across the board. Maybe we really can do something about this. Something can change.
I think so. And I like the way you put that in something that's very easy to understand, because we do have the numbers, and we have, 3 years, almost 4 years of basically data saying, oh, it's not just me, or, oh, this is normal. I think that we're at the point right now where it's time to then start saying, okay, so this group of people, this large group of like-minded, but yet open-minded, because I think that's a whole nother topic. But with those numbers, I think we can start to push back a little bit on the things that need development or that need ideas to be pushed through. So it will be very interesting. I'm interested to see what happens next as well. It's an everyday evolving, changing thing. So yeah. We'll see what happens as we go forward.
No, it's exciting.
Yeah, it is. So a couple of final questions. This one is a fun one. If you could visit any one location that you've yet to experience, where would that be?
That is not, it's so hard. One location. Wow, there are so many amazing places in the world. And for different reasons, for the history piece, for the adventure piece. I would say Turkey for the history, but I'm gonna sneak in a second one for that adventure culture. I have not been to South America, and and so there's the Patagonia area. Thinking Argentina, the mountains. Doing a trip with friends. Whichever, backpacking, paddling. Kind of adventure. That has a big appeal.
Very cool. Well, we just literally yesterday got back from a trip to Cuba, which was really cool. It was a neat experience, but I agree it's impossible to just say one. So I'm glad you
I cheated a little bit.
That's right. Okay, the last question is also probably another one of those that's a little bit difficult to just answer. But sometimes in the variation of answers is where the real gold is. If you could tell the entire world, if the entire world was listening and you had the stage, what's one truth that you've learned? What's an encouragement that you think is something that could reach the masses? What would that one thing that you would say? What would that be?
Big responsibility. When I think in terms, is it global? When I think in terms of the global mobility world, I often think very simply, and you're not alone, and you're not crazy, the things that you go through. And I suppose that's true of the entire human experience. We often, I think we can start believing that, man, I'm just so alone and going through whatever this thing is I'm going through. But when mobility, impacts us in the isolation, piece, and the pulling apart from some of our other our social connections, that can feel really like you're alone. So that's really important, and they're not crazy. These are normal. There are things that we go through in that process that are weird, but they're normal, yeah. And it's you come through it. But I think even bigger than that. So someone says, "Okay, well that's good. Here I am. Now what?" And now what would be just that it's essential for us to care for each other. We in a sense we are our brother's keeper, and we are all tied together. And I think we really can't go backward in time to kind of an isolationist world without some kind of cataclysmic event that cuts off all these ties. And so the way forward is really is really through deeper care and empathy. And so within that, I think there are 1,000 ways to be creative. There are 100,000 ways to be creative in how we look out for each other and how we care for each other. But I think that would be my message.
That's a good one. We actually have a T-shirt that's going to be released with the launch that says humankind, and then underneath it says be both. Because I really think that it does come down to kindness and empathy and treating each other as we want to be treated ourselves. And that caring for each other piece, as much as it's kind of surprising, I think that's one of the biggest missing pieces of the human puzzle right now, is that we're not showing up on a regular basis to care for each other. So I like that.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's one of the things I've learned in coaching. I was many, years as a teacher, did my master's in that, but it was when I did coaching that I learned to listen better. And I think that ability, it's hard to be kind and to care for people unless you're willing to listen to them first, to give them more than that 30-second, yes or no kind of time slot. And I think that, I think that matters.
I think it does too. I think it does. And that's one of the topics in the Triangle community that we're starting to shift towards in the next couple of months as we gear up for the launch, is that we have, as you said in the beginning, a responsibility to each other. And we have a responsibility as we are now 15,000 plus to be that change and to start listening to each other and to go out into our communities, our bigger communities, our more locale-based communities, and be the example. Because if there's no one else doing it right now. So I think we need to own up a little bit and start doing that. So I agree. Where can we find you? Give us the website for Daraja.
We're at Daraja, Daraja.us on the web. We have a Facebook page at Daraja TCK, and those are the main ones. I do tweet occasionally. It doesn't happen that much unless there's an event, going on. But what is that? I can't remember my tweet handle at MVP. No, it's at @_MVP.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then
I'm that generation that isn't quite as as attached to my device.
Handle? Yeah. Yeah, you can always tell when someone spouts off like 10 different social media handles. You're like, oh, okay, you're definitely younger than I am. And then we'll make sure that we put the link for the 3rd edition of the book. Is it titled the same? Is it Third Culture Kids, The Experience of Growing Up Among Worlds?
It's Growing Up Among Worlds. Took the experience piece out of it.
Okay.
Yeah. Which, it's again, it's one of those important ideas, probably not for the cover of the book, but that TCK is not an identity. It's an experience that you have. And, but that's, anyway, that's just a bonus.
Okay.
But it's growing up among worlds, third edition. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'll make sure that we have a link to that. Thank you so much for not only serving on the advisory board, but for the time for talking in this interview. It was really great to get to know you better. And I'm excited to see what happens for everybody in the coming years as we develop out some strategies to help make the world a better place.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be a part of the team and in that conversation, and really want to honor the work that you have put in to the Triangle community. It's you've been relentless, and it's an amazing thing to see. So thanks for doing that.
You know how this is when it's something that you're passionate about. It doesn't so much feel like work. So it is an honor to do it for the community and help encourage it to grow. So cheers to you. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you.
Thanks.